Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. I am here today with someone who is a recent fangirl. I am so in awe of you, Marcia. Thank you so much for being here today on Getting Rich Together. Listeners, Marcia Dawood is someone who's been talking about the power of capital and how we can change the world through the ways in which we look at investing our money into the companies and people that we believe in, ultimately looking at values, money, impact, and change. Not only has she been gracing stages longer than most people have been on this topic, but she's also the podcast host and founder of the Angel Next Door podcast, which profiles and highlights just all the different shapes and forms and ways in which we can create real change in the world with our money. She's also the author of Doing Good While Doing Well, which I love because I think we all deserve to do good while doing well. And she's an associate producer of Show Her the Money, a show that I believe almost all of you guys have been seeing on stages as it's come across to your markets, something that I hope gets picked up nationally because it is such an incredible documentary. Marcia, thank you so much for being here today on Getting Rich Together. I'm grateful to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. Obviously, before you had this prolific career and presence as this angel investor who's out there changing the way in which we think about money, you were once a little girl. And
Mhm.
that little girl was once upon a time 7, 8, 9 years old. I would love to know more about her. Where was life? What were you thinking about? What were your parents doing? And ultimately, what were some of these early money stories you picked up?
Yes. And that is such an interesting story because it's like two-sided. So I had amazing parents. First of all, I was an only child. So people were like, oh dear, an only child. But I was not spoiled. So even though I was the only child, it was more about just living a good life. My parents always taught me you do unto others as you want done unto yourself. And that was like a huge thing in our house. And my mom worked. She was a cytotechnologist, which basically means that she looked at all types of bodily fluid under a microscope except blood. That's right. So, and she worked from 3 years before I was born. My parents got married when they were very young. They were high school sweethearts. And they got married at 20 and had me when they were 23. So I remember their 30th birthday parties. I remember they were very just practical. We lived in a very practical house. It was like the very typical American story. And they were just really awesome. And my dad, to his credit, I don't know I don't know really why he thought that this was a great idea at the time, other than he just did. But he would take me aside every time that there was time to pay the bill. So this was been I was probably 9 or 10 at the time. And he would say, okay, now remember back then there's no online banking, right?
Yeah.
So I'm dating myself, I know, but whatever. And he had this box. And anytime that we got a bill, like the electric bill or whatever it was, he would put it in the box. And at the end of the month, when he got his paycheck and my mom got her paycheck, she worked too, after I was 5. She did take off between the time I was born and when I was 5 years old, which was so nice. But he would take the money and he would pay the bills, and he would have me sit with him and we would look at the budget, and this money's going here. This money goes to savings. This is the money we have to pay for living. This is the money we have to use to buy food. And I didn't know at the time what a gift this was, but this was amazing that somebody was teaching me at such a young age this whole concept of budgeting, saving, what we used our money for. And the biggest thing he taught me will stay with me for the rest of my life, which is you always live below your means. So no matter how much you have, that doesn't mean that's how much you spend. And he would always teach me that we only need X. So we're only going to do that. And we don't need to live in a bigger house and drive a fancier car, anything like that. As he was doing better, my mom moved up in their careers. So it was just such an interesting life lesson.
That's so fascinating, especially hearing that story. It's an anomaly. Not everyone gets the opportunity to understand that life costs money at such a young age. I feel like most young people realize that life costs money after college and they go,
Mm-hmm.
oh, the toilet paper costs money and these things that I need to stay alive actually cost money. I mean, there is just by virtue of being born, there is a price tag on our life. And having that understanding, albeit not in quite a dire way, but in this way of understanding that your lifestyle costs money, I imagine it's something that's probably been really impactful for you, even as a young person, as you started to work, I imagine, or started
Right.
to sort of express yourself in the world. As you found yourself in high school and starting to get curious and think about things, were you like head down in studying, or were you someone who picked up a part-time job? What was the value of money to you when you were in those high school years?
So I think that people either have an something within them to be money motivated or they don't. Okay. So, like, one of my best friends, we used to waitress together. And I would be the one who'd be like, hey, seat me, like I want to make more money, blah, blah, blah. And she could have, she could have cared less. And no matter what happened, no matter how the evening went, no matter how busy I was or she was, I always made more money than her. And she would always say, why does this happen? And I'm like, because I'm the one who's hustling and you are not hustling, right? Because you just don't care as much as I do. And I saw that really from a very early age. I did get a job when I was 15. Back then, you could work at 15 if you had your parents' permission or something like that. And I ended up working at the Chi Chi's, which was a restaurant nearby. It was a chain restaurant. And I started as a hostess. I remember I made $3.35 an hour. And I thought I was living large and I would save my paychecks. And then from there, I got to a point where they'd let me waitress. That was I had to wait a little while on that because I think you had to be 18 to serve alcohol. And then they eventually let me be a bartender. The manager started to realize like I had a clue. So then they would let me do things like the payroll at the end of the night. And this was when I was like a senior in high school. And I remember I would be there really late on a Sunday night because that's when payroll had to go in and everything's manual back then. There were no computers. And my dad would be calling the restaurant at like midnight. He's like, you have school tomorrow. It's like, oh my gosh, you're right. I do have school tomorrow. So I got to go. Sorry, guys. Got to go.
I mean, talk about both longevity at one place, right? So these days,
Yeah.
it's like people are hopping around. And a high school kid has a job for 3 months and then they
Right.
quit. And it's like, so things are so much more fluid now. So, first of all, you stuck with the job and you saw progress, which I think, again, young people today don't stick with things long enough to see progression in a way that is truly meaningful. And then holy bananas, you were basically running the
Kind
restaurant
of was.
and and you were barely legal. So like this idea of business ownership or entrepreneurialism and understanding the way books operated. I mean, what was it like doing payroll? Was there anything shocking about how things were done? What did you learn from that?
Well, I just remember thinking, okay, so these are the people that are working and they get paid, especially with waiting tables, because waitresses and waiters would get paid like $2.13 or something like that because they got tips. So, how that all equated, and then how we used to have to account for the tips when it came to taxes, because you couldn't just say, oh, I didn't get any tips. I don't want to have to pay any taxes. So, there would be like a calculation that we'd have to do in order to, like, I have such like very vivid memories of all this. Like I remember all the exact dollar amounts we made. All like I can maybe not remember stuff I was doing last week, but I can remember this. And because it was just so interesting because we had to do it manually. So sometimes nowadays we do have like incredible tools. We've got all these calculators and computers and things that'll do stuff for us. But I also think it has made us a little bit lazy. I got this really calculator kind of brain because I had to do it like that. I had to either do it, I had a calculator, I could use a calculator, but I didn't have these like systems that would all of a sudden just say, oh, well, you could do this and this and this, and then it'll tie it all together for you. No, I was tying it all together. I was sitting there with the calculator, figuring out how many hours did this person work? How many hours did that person work? And by the way, the reason why I liked working so late into a Sunday is because I waited tables all day and I was already 8 hours in by time we got to like 5 o'clock or whatever it was, 6 o'clock. So I was on overtime doing the payroll. So I was like, woo, making some money here.
Oh, the blessings of overtime. It's
Mhm.
I think what's also interesting is nowadays there's most people won't ever see a check anymore, right? It's like the money
Right.
goes straight into their account. They have no idea how much is going to taxes, how much is being pulled out for social security. There's such a disconnect around what it costs, how much we make, and where it all goes. And I feel like if more people double clicked on, oh, the taxes that are being pulled out are this. Where does that I started to trace it back. I wonder where that money is being spent by the government, or how does like starting to pull
Mhm.
the layers back on where the money goes. I feel like we would have so many more just curious people around politics and government if we were to actually bring it back down to some really simple things like, oh, this is how much money like, I'm getting paid, but I'm actually paying you. So what is actually happening here?
Right, right, right.
So fascinating. Okay, so high school, you're a total badass. Here you are. I'm surprised in your career portfolio, you're not going to tell me you opened up a restaurant, but I don't think that was in the
No,
cards.
no, no.
Um,
In fact, I worked in restaurants in high school and in college, and I have such an appreciation for the wait staff, the bartenders, all the people, the bus people, everybody, the dishwashers, the cooks, everybody who works in the service business. It is a really hard, hard job. And even to this day, I am super generous to all the people there, making sure that people get taken care of because it's a grind. And I knew then I did not want to do that for the rest of my life.
that's great. I feel like sometimes we always wonder what do we want to do, but also knowing what you don't want to do is
Yeah.
equally, if not sometimes more of an important unlock. Talk to me about college. So in college, how did you decide what to study? Was it motivated by money? Was it, I want this particular career path? And was there some financial rationale to that? How did you both navigate moving through college and what your ideation of yourself would be at that time?
Yeah, so I think at the time that I went to college, I had already known that I was interested in retail buying, and back then that was a real big thing. In fact, I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and Boscov's is which is still around, is a big department store there, but they were bought out of a store that was pretty close to my house, and my parents knew one of the buyers, and I got to do one of those take your friend's kid to work day kind of thing, and they let me shadow and see what that was like. And so I thought, oh, that sounds like a fun job. And it was all about numbers, and I'm a big numbers person. And I was always really good at math, English, I thought this was fun thing that I could do. So I ended up going to college. Did a business degree. And right out of college, I ended up working for Kaufman's department store as an assistant buyer. And I thought I had won the lottery when I found out how much money I was making. It was like $28,000 at the time. And I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. But little did I know that the retail buying industry was going to really consolidate. And nowadays, it's almost all corporate and everything's bought out of a central location. There isn't the type of buying that used to go on back in the day. So I ended up leaving that in my 20s because I saw the writing on the wall that I wasn't going to be working very long. I kept seeing people like getting laid off. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like I'm only like 25 years old. I don't want to get laid off. That seems crazy. And I'm young enough and I don't have kids yet or anything like that. I wasn't married. So I thought, well, I'll just figure out something else to do. And so I ended up going into education. And that's when I started working for Kaplan. And I worked for them for almost 17 years. Talk about
Wow.
longevity.
Yeah, that's incredible. And as you made this move from buying, what's so funny is buying was my first job out of college.
Yeah. See, I know we
And
are like kindred
I
spirits.
know, and I hate to say this, but the salary was still really crappy. I think my starting salary as an assistant was like $40,000. And living in New York City, it's like not enough to breathe, you know?
No.
It's like, how did
Unfortunately, I
I
was not living in New York
like,
City. Yeah.
it's like, how did I breathe at all? I must have been eating air and rice. But moving to Kaplan and finding yourself there, obviously a 17-year tenure, a lot can happen during that time. And you're obviously coming into yourself as a woman, right? Owning your own power, understanding self-advocacy in different ways, what you want out of life. How did you look at whether it was negotiations of a salary or different ways in which you navigated your career path there? When did you really come into your own of what you wanted? How did you start to direct your career and find yourself 17 years? I'm sure there were many moments where you might have raised your hand and said, you know what, screw this. Like this is not worth it. But what kept you there? What were some of your motivations?
Well, believe it or not, the entire time I worked there, I really only had about 3 or 4 different bosses. First, I worked in sales and marketing for the first 10 years, and then I worked in operations for the last 6 and a half, 7 years. And when I worked in operations, I worked for one person. When I was in sales and marketing, I worked for 2 or 3 people that entire time. And they saw that I was very good at well, first they saw I was very good at sales. And so I moved my way up from I was at one college. Basically, the division I worked for was the after high school trades program. We had 72 campuses. I worked at one of the campuses and I started at that one campus and then I moved to the manager of that campus's admissions department. Then I moved to a regional role. Then I moved to a national role.
So moving, like
They
they
kept
were
me
like,
moving.
she's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Let's keep her engaged. And
Right.
like, okay.
Yeah, and as a funny side story, they would have a bunch of us who had been there a long time and were pretty good salespeople. They would do like personality profiles of us, and I remember they came in and they said, "Okay, Marcia, so we just did this personality assessment. We got the results back. If we were in a burning building, we would want to be standing next to you." So apparently my resourcefulness levels are like off the chart. Like we'd be like, you would figure out how to get not just yourself out of the burning building, but also everybody else. I'm like, I learned so much about myself in those early years of working because they would just do all these different personality assessments. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that is kind of like me. Anyway, yeah. So I did sales and marketing and then I wouldn't say bored with it, but at the time I'd done it for a long time, 10 years. So I said, hey, I want to do something different. And they said, okay, well, how about you start working in operations? And so I ended up working as a director of operations at one school. And then I moved into a regional position. And then I ended my career there as the head of career services for the company.
That's an an incredible journey. And as you were, they kept you progressing, which is good on them, right? They kept you interested. Were there what were the moments when you were like, okay, I want this new job or it's time for me to get a raise? Like, how did you navigate this corporate infrastructure as you were looking at really building your own personal financial life? How did things start to form for you?
Well, I was lucky in the sense that if you look at pretty much any industry sale, the salespeople tend to get paid more than other departments. So I had that going for me out of the gate. And I also do really strongly believe that people stay at companies because of the people they work for, and they leave companies because of the people they work for. And I just happened to get really lucky that there were 2 men actually who were very supportive, very open to me moving ahead, and did a lot to be a champion for me. And those 2 people I still am in touch with today, and I care about the fact that they really did do that, and they helped me to move forward. What I didn't like was to see that overall, and this I think happens just about at any company, you do have basically salary discrepancies. So once I got to a certain level, I certainly wasn't making, even past the sales thing, I wasn't making as much as some of my male counterparts.
Of course. And were there any ways in which you were able to close the gap there for yourself? Was there any sort of self advocacy involved as you dishearteningly found out that these things were taking place?
I think I stood up for myself. I got to a point where I thought, well, I know that the work I'm doing is good because everything was measured. There were a lot of metrics. We were an accredited college, so we had a lot of standards that we had to meet. And especially when I was in the career services department, we had to make sure that we were placing our students in their field. And that was obviously very important to our company, but it was super important to me to know that these students spent their time, spent their money to be able to get an education. And we want to make sure that they can now go out and be productive members of society and support their families and all those kind of things. So, those types of metrics I saw moving in the right direction, but I didn't necessarily see the money or the titles that went along with it.
Mhm. And so during this time period, obviously, as you earn more, there's more things to spend money on
That's
and
right. Yeah.
more fun ways to expand our lifestyle. And yet your dad's there in the background going,
Yeah. Yes.
live
Yes.
within your
Yes.
means and don't overdo it. But, when you're young, it's hard sometimes, right? It's like you're starting to test your own boundaries and getting a taste for what's available to you. How did you start to manage your money once you were in really a point of, okay, I can cover my bills and I'm in a good homeostasis here? Were you still in that saver mindset? Were there ratios or ways in which you looked at either investing your money, saving your money? What were some of the key things that you started to implement? And more importantly for me, where did you start to learn about what to do with your resources?
Yeah, I think learning what to do, I learned from my dad, but I also have the DNA, the saving gene, the DNA gene. Okay. Maybe it's when I was born because I was born in June. So I'm a Cancer. And apparently, if you read the little description that you see in the newspaper or whatever, there might as well just be a picture of me right there. Here's what a Cancerian is. And there's me. And because we tend to be like, savers, we're like oversensitive to things. I could go on and on. But yes, so I think that helped because as I started to make money, again, I thought when I had remember, I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So the cost of living there is very different than New York City. So when I got my first job and in the buying area, I thought this was like I thought I'd won the lottery. This was like so great. And so I immediately started to be like bucketing money. And this is what I think is so important that we don't necessarily see people doing today. Because even when I talk to people about angel investing and I talk about backing entrepreneurial companies, I'm like, listen, you can't just decide that you're going to just all of a sudden on a whim, I'm just going to take some money and I'm just going to invest it in this or that. Or you really have to be thinking about it strategically because you don't want to put money into an asset class that's illiquid and then not be able to get to that money over a certain period of time. You really have to be thinking about it in a totally different way than you might think about how you would save for your kids' college or how you would save for a vacation you want to take in 6 months or how you would save for that emergency fund in case your refrigerator breaks. All of those things take a different type of mindset and a different way of thinking about it. And so having that type of mindset early on, just because I think I was kind of born with it, and then my dad teaching me that I was able to think about it in a way that made me personally have a comfort level. Because I think at the end of the day, we want to feel like our money is helping us to not just be able to buy the things we want to buy, but to be able to give us the time so that we can go and do the things that we want to do and be with the people that we want to be with. And if that means that I get to use some of my money in order to create more time for myself so that I can spend more time with my family, well, then that's a different mindset. And those are the types of things that especially right now, I'm super interested in talking to more people about.
I love that. And so, question, the buckets that you created, then how did those buckets, so what were they? And then how did they evolve, right? Life is non-linear. So in the process of, let's say, the first job out of college to maybe by the end of your tenure at Kaplan, how did the buckets evolve and change and how did you make considerations on that?
Well, I hear too many people talk about how they live paycheck to paycheck. And that always really scares me because then what happens when there is an emergency? And there's seems to always be some kind of emergency at some point. So, how do you handle that if the paycheck to paycheck is what's happening? So, I guess for me, I always tried to be under the paycheck. so that I could put the money into savings or have it in a retirement account. And fortunately, I was working for a company, even when I was in the retail job, that they did have a retirement plan and 401k. And I did put money into that early on. And I remember one of my bosses saying to me, "Hey, this is really important and you're really young. And if you do this now, you will reap the benefits." And I was like, "Yeah, but I need that money now. I wanna use that money now." I had the 25-year-old mindset of like, "Yeah, I wanna go on a trip and do these things." And this person, like, really pulled me aside and said, "No, think about this. Think about the compounding effect of what you can do with this money over not just the next 10 or 20 years, but think about, like, you're 25 right now. Think about when you're 65 and 75. That's a lot of time to be able to have your money grow."
Yeah. It's such a gift. It sounds to me like you had some really good people in your court.
Mhm.
There have been some good little birdies in your ear who are like, "Hey, think about
Mhm.
this," or "Let me help you," or "Let me give you insight and help you shape the ways in which things have unfolded." Because certainly it's had that person not said that thing, right? Things could look different. What were the dominoes that fell that led you to leaving this incredible 17-year career? I imagine it was heartbreaking for probably everyone at the company because by that point you are now institutional, you're part of the history of an organization. How did you make that decision to leave and what was it, what happened there?
Well, in a nutshell, if 17 years prior to that, somebody had told me what the salary ranges were in the finance industry, I might have gone that route because I ended up meeting my now husband in when he was already working in finance. And believe it or not, in 1992 or whatever it was, we ended up starting at the same basic salary. And then I saw what happened with him going into the finance department and working with investment banking and stuff like that. And I thought, oh dear, I think I picked the wrong industry because I maxed my way out of, I couldn't really go any farther. It didn't have anything to do with people not wanting to give me more money or pay me more money. It's just the nature of what the jobs that I had within the company warranted. It also got to a point where my husband's job became where we had to move a lot in order for him to advance. I have three stepsons. They lived in Charlotte, or they still live in Charlotte. Now we live in Charlotte, but they lived here the entire time that we were doing all this moving, basically between 2010 and 2020. So during those 10 years, we lived in Pittsburgh, New York, San Francisco, Dallas, and Charlotte. And it was great for me to learn all about angel investing in all those different ecosystems, which was fabulous. But it got to a point where it was a little too burdensome on Kaplan to have me not be able to be in one location. I was already in a regional job, so it really didn't matter that much. But at the same time, it meant that our family was torn in a lot of different directions because we were accommodating his job, accommodating my job, and accommodating three children who lived in a different city and making sure that we were a big part of their life, as I know lots about. So yeah, so it just made a lot of sense for me to leave at that time. And it was a good time because the work that I had tried to do to help build up the career service department had gone really well. And that was it.
That's amazing. And
Mhm.
so you started talking a little bit about angel investing, and certainly that is something that I feel like today we're starting to hear so much about it. I think it's really become super hypey. There's a lot of conversation, very little, I think, real education as far as what it means. When did you start to whet your appetite with investing in alternatives, and how did you make that decision to say, okay, I've done well in the stock market, or I feel secure with our 401k? Was real estate another anchor point for you? What were some of the anchor points that you had in your life ready before you said, I'm going to go invest in something that's high risk?
I mean, I think from a standpoint of like the buckets, when I saw that there were entrepreneurs who were out there creating such amazing change. And when I learned about this, I lived in Pittsburgh still. And I thought, well, nothing's happening here in Pittsburgh. And Come to find out, I was 100% wrong. There's amazing things happening all over the country, in every city and every town, and all over the world. But even in Pittsburgh, way more than I thought, way more than a lot of people think. In fact, to the point where Facebook, Google, a lot of the big tech companies have actually put offices there because there's so much happening. And I just thought, well, wait a minute. I didn't think I could be a part of this. I thought you had to be like super wealthy. You had to fly in a private plane. You had to be invited. You have to have a finance degree. So I was just not really sure that this was for me. And then when I realized, hey, this is something that I could do, the first angel group I became a member of it is run by a female. So I thought, oh, I can see myself too as somebody who could do this because I'm seeing other people who are like me doing it. And then back to the buckets, I thought, I know this is a risky asset class. And they basically, I came into it in a great group. The group was super supportive. They were very good at teaching from the beginning. They were super great about saying, hey, don't make any investments right away. Just come to a couple meetings, learn, and we'll help you. And you don't have to think that you're out there on your own. And that's really how I made the decision that, and my husband and I together really decided. He was like, no, if this is something you're interested in, then, you can go do the work, like the due diligence reports, and work with the angel group to figure out what companies you want to invest in. But then as a family, we decided, okay, well, here's this bucket and this is how much money we'll put in the bucket. And then we'll go from there.
I love that. And so, yep, that was my next question. How did you guys decide together if he was also equally as enthusiastic or really saw this as your lane? Has he, since you started your angel investing journey, has he become any more active in angel investing as well? Or has it really been like, this is your jam?
I think once I became a board member for the Angel Capital Association, chaired the board, and then got put on the SEC advisory committee, he was like, you might know something about this. But I will say that our dinner conversations are extremely interesting because he works mainly in the public markets and I work in this private market area. So I come at investing from a little bit of a different standpoint now that I have some experience. He comes at it from public markets. So we have lots of interesting conversations about how this all kind of morphs together. I'm very lucky that we really have the same kind of risk tolerances and risk profile. In fact, I'm probably back to the saver, the Cancerian saver in me. I sometimes would be like, oh no, that's way too risky. I don't want to make that type of an investment. And he's an immigrant who came here with basically the clothes on his back and built a life for himself and now has a very good job as a productive member of society here in our country and as a citizen. So his risk tolerance and his risk profile is so different because he would just say, well, if I lost all the money, maybe not today, but back then, he would say, if we lost all the money, it's okay. I'll just go make more money. Like his mindset was so eye-opening to me. I was just like, oh my gosh, like I always thought live below your means, do all these things, and that was great. But his idea of like really don't don't hold money so tightly that you're not able to live your life. Like if you get so hung up on it being the end goal and the end all be all, then you're not letting go of that and doing the things that you care about. And in this case, helping to bring those innovations to life that we could potentially be a part of. So in a lot of cases, he's so generous and he would be like, oh, absolutely. You want to make that investment? Go ahead. And he knows that I'm so conservative that he would say, if you've said it's okay, then it's probably okay. Right. Where he might meet an entrepreneur for 5 minutes. He'd be like, okay, sure. I'd love to invest, and I have to be like, no, no, no. We have to go through the process. Let's not go crazy. Right. But I think it all comes down to a lot of communication. You need to talk about it. You need to like kind of each talk about how you feel about money because we all have our own relationship with it. And I think the more we don't talk about it, the more you hear about families that don't really make it because they're not having those open conversations. And then I also wanted to have a lot of open conversations with my stepchildren because I wanted them to see money doesn't grow on trees, but also the buckets, the ways that you should be thinking about this and the ways that you can use your money for good.
So how has it been educating and involving your stepchildren in the financial education process. What do you think worked really well and what sucked? Like what was like, all right, that was not a good thing. But what also worked well? Because I feel like we start up the conversation, like young people today just don't see the cash, right? Like they
Right.
don't my one of my stepchildren had a birthday party. He just turned 8 and his grandmother gave him cash in an envelope, right? And he
Mm.
looked at it and he was like, wow, like, and he was like, oh, it's, and coming out of his mouth was like this uncertainty of, is this a lot? Is it a little? I don't know what I can do with this. But it was like this paper. And meanwhile, in his mind, he's thinking, oh, what I know about transactions or money is when my stepmother and father go to Starbucks, they'll use a card, like a gift, the scan card,
Oh, right, right.
or I want Fortnite dollars for my video, right? So all this stuff is so digital, right? They're not seeing a lot of cash. But meanwhile, he's like, okay, paper, what does this mean? So how are you sort of navigate or how did you navigate some of these conversations and what really landed?
So I think talking more about the companies and what they were doing, what they were working on,
Mm,
and kind of staying away from, at least when it came to angel investing or even investing in general, because they are young and you're trying to teach them the concepts, not necessarily about the dollar amounts,
yeah.
because that's going to depend on every single person's going to be a little bit different. And even if you have a little or a lot, you can still make a difference. So it was like prioritizing. For example, we had a car. It was pretty old. At the time, it was probably really old. And it had a chip in the windshield. And it wasn't in a place that was detrimental to my driving, but it was in the way. So one of my stepkids said, "Well, Marcia, why don't you just get that fixed?" And my immediate reaction was my Cancerian saver voice in me was like, this is not as important as these other things. So I kind of used that as a lesson of, hey, just because something's broken or it isn't perfect. In this case, it was fine, right?
Mm.
And but it wasn't perfect. It did. He's like, you could just get that fixed. I'm like, I could, but is that the best use of my time and my money in order to get this fixed? When likely the second I get it fixed, I'm going to go out on the highway again and I'm getting another chip in the windshield, or I'm going to get a new car in a while because this car's old. Whatever the story is, you have to just balance out what those things are. And I think they appreciated the fact that I was at least talking about it and giving them some real world examples at the time of like, hey, this is what's important and you can make your own decisions about what's important. Maybe what's important to me isn't the same, but that's okay because at the end of the day, we're all different and some people want to do some things with their money and some people want to do others and that's all good.
Yeah. It's so personal. It's like your kids, my kids, like they're going to go through life with their own relationship to this without really, I mean, so personal and so dependent on not only the things that they were taught, so all the good little things in their ears, but then also life experience that we might not have any control over.
Yeah.
And I feel like my role as a stepmom sometimes is really to hold the lens to critical thinking,
Yes.
like
Yes.
how do we create better humans who can think about the world in a way that makes sense and that's meaningful, where their work becomes their life's calling and they can be productive members of society with having, I don't know, the right attachment to their output and that work is meaningful, which is maybe for another podcast
Yeah.
about the meaning of work and compensation. You have held, Marcia, just an incredible number of various roles post Kaplan. And I'm really curious as to, aside from starting off as being an angel investor yourself and starting to get interested, becoming more active, but then this decision to take on more formal roles and starting to really steward the way in which not just people think about angel investing, but specifically women thinking about angel investing, thinking about investing into other female founders, thinking about wealth building. At what point did you say, you know what, this is not just a personal interest? This is actually something where I can make a significant difference and I have something to say, and I'm gonna go out there and say it. What happened?
So, okay, my bucket that I had some money for angel investing, it got really small. And all my money went to angel investing that I was going to use. And then I didn't have any more money. So that became a problem. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I still see these amazing entrepreneurs. They're doing incredible things. I need to have some exits from the investments I've already made, but they were all a little early. So, or I just made them so that we weren't getting money back right away. And I also thought, well, wait a minute. I would talk to people and I would say, well, you could do this too. Especially like people would say to me, oh, what kind of companies did you see today? Or what kind of companies have you talked to lately? Tell us some stories about them. They always wanted to hear stories. I'm like, well, you know what? You could get involved in this too. And people would say, oh, no, I can't. I need to be rich, back to the whole thing. I need to have a finance degree, this and that. And I thought, well, you really don't. And then as we moved around the country between 2010 and 2020, I started to see like what it was like in New York City versus what it was like in Dallas versus what it was like in Pittsburgh. And then I ended up, after living all of those places and spending a lot of time in Charlotte, I ended up living in Silicon Valley. And I was like, wow, this is very different in a lot of ways. But these ecosystems were all very different. And because I was already part of the Angel Capital Association board, I got to see it in a little bit of a different way because people would invite me into their meetings and they would kind of open up to like what was going on, how things were structured even in one place versus another. And I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. And how come more people don't know about, and it could be anything. And then I started to realize, wait a minute, I'm the one who's seeing from a vantage point that other people aren't seeing from. Maybe I need to talk about that more because I would talk to even some of my most experienced angel friends who had been doing this way, way, way longer than me. And they would hear my perspective because I had seen it from this different vantage point, and they would say, huh, I had never really thought about it like that, or I didn't realize that that was something, whatever. So then I thought, well, wait a minute, how do I get this message out? And that's when I started the podcast. And then I was lucky enough to get invited to do a TEDx talk in Charlotte in 2022. And that was 11 minutes long. And people would watch it and they would say, oh my gosh, we're so interested. We're really inspired. We want to do something. This whole investing in an entrepreneurial company is like so interesting. But your talk was only 11 minutes. Now, what do we do? So that led me to write the book because it is personal to everybody. It's kind of like anything. You're going to spend your money or put your time to what you care about. And nowadays, there's so many different ways to do it that I just thought, I feel like if I don't do it, who was going to do it then? Like, I felt like I had the opportunity to be and the privilege to be able to live in these different places, see all these different things. I can't just sit on that. I felt as a service to especially to the female founders that are out there who are killing themselves trying to raise money. And I'm seeing like, wait a minute, if we could just get more people, especially more people who looked like them, to be on the playing field with all of us, then we could actually make real change. So I thought, well, if I'm not going to do it, then I that's just not right. It has to be me. And I hope that other people will also be with me. And I'm following others too. Catherine Mott, who's the angel group leader of the first group I was ever a part of. She has been my friend, my mentor, my inspiration. She was on the board of the Angel Capital Association prior to me. She chaired it prior to me. She was on the SEC committee prior to me. She has been like somebody who I've always admired and said, hey, you're out there, pioneer, really making change. I can follow along and help.
I mean, Marcia, to think about the just millions of dollars through your butterfly effects that have been able to be mobilized and that have gone into companies whereby the investors were investing with their values is truly something remarkable. I think I got some chills from that. I mean, your platforms, your messages, how relatable I think you present the opportunity and also how it's personal and emotional. I think are so critical to moving capital to create change. I don't know if you'll ever know just the tremendous amount of impact that you've already had, but it will certainly and certainly has continued to grow as people continue to share so much of your content and share your book and the podcast and your TEDx talk, which is like such a highly watched show. I mean, that talk is so incredible. As you sort of start to reflect on the work that you are doing today, you've held roles that are now in like sitting on boards, you're just a prolific investor. You've also been behind the scenes as a managing director at Golden Seas or heading looking at portfolios, heading up on their leadership team. Like you've seen the structures in the organizations and how these things are coming together. What are your thoughts on where we are in this moment? What is being asked of? Where are we needing to rise up to the calling? And also just given how I don't know, there's a tremendous amount of momentum in the air that I can taste, but I'm really curious to know what you are seeing through your experience and through your intuition.
So I do think that we're still at the very, very beginning. I mean, we are in the infancy of helping private entrepreneurial companies. And I did have Kendrick Wynn, who is the CEO of Republic.com, on my podcast recently. And at the end of the episode, I actually had him talking about the democratization of the private markets. And I give this kind of like fantasy idea in my book about like if I was given a magic wand and I could make something happen. Imagine if the private markets and the ability to be able to invest in them was as easy and simple as it is now today for the public markets. Now, keep in mind, in the 80s and 90s, it was not. You had to have a brokerage account, a broker. You had to have it funded ahead of time. It took days to do a trade, a stock trade. Now you can go on to a platform like E-Trade or Robinhood, and you can trade a public stock in seconds. And you can even trade a fraction of a public stock in
It's
seconds,
crazy.
right? It's crazy. We aren't anywhere near that in the private markets. And a lot of that is because there's a lot more private companies than there are public companies. And the SEC does want to protect the investor and wants there to be a lot of disclosures, which I can completely understand. So we got some work to do before we could ever get to my dream of people being able to do it as easily for private companies as it can be for public companies. But as soon as we let that barrier down on the public side, look at how many people over the last, especially like 5 to 10 years, have actually begun to participate. So now, if we could do that with the private markets, even to, and we're starting to because companies like Republic, WeFunder, Start Engine, the equity crowdfunding platforms, they are regulated by the SEC and they do have lots of disclosures around that. And those are private companies that are getting investment. So those investors can see that. But how amazing could it be if we could start to get even more and more people, even at a younger and younger age, to realize that this is something that they can do and they can affect the change they want to see in the world? Boom, mind blowing what could happen.
Ugh, I love that. As you think about the future ahead of you and not just the incredible body of work that you have built, which is incredible, but we're also living just so much longer these days. And
Mhm.
there's so much more ahead of us. And it's so interesting to think about some of the technologies and things that are around today that we couldn't have even thought about 40 years ago. But certainly, assuming, Marcia, you live to a nice, ripe young age of 104, which, is not unlikely, right? Like there's so much more evidence is pointing towards that. And also then gives you quite a bit more time on this planet to leave the impact and to create and actually be able to see the changes, right? You've now been at this
Mhm.
so long where your impact is felt and seen, and you can see really what change is happening under your eye and what you've done. When you start to think about legacy and what more there is to do for you, yes, you've done so much, but I imagine there's probably more. What do you see is ahead?
Well, what I've come to find is that what I'm talking about when I'm out talking to people about, hey, I know you don't know anything about investing in an entrepreneurial company or anything about equity crowdfunding or anything like that, let me help demystify it for you. There's still this kind of stigma of, "Oh dear, that isn't for me." And I think part of it has to do with people have, as we've been talking about, a very unique and interesting relationship to money, and everybody's is different. So, I think going back and almost to demystify the demystifying and demystify this idea about what is it that we really care about when it comes to money? And can we let go of it a little bit from the standpoint of it being the destination and actually have there be more financial fluidity in what we're doing so that people will think about it like, hey, I can use my money to get the things that I want in my life, but that doesn't mean I'm getting things, meaning like a boat or a car or whatever it is, right? It would be I'm getting the things I want, meaning I have the time to do what I want. I have the time to be with the people I want to be with. And that financial fluidity, I think, is something that if we had more people thinking about it, then they would start to realize, hey, I can now take some of my money and use it to see the good I want to see in the world.
Mm. Preach. Amen. I think that is beautiful. One of my favorite questions to ask is we've talked so much about investing and values and really the impact and power we have when we are conscious with our capital. But my question for you is really around the fun things we get to do with money. What have been some of your most favorite purchases or experiences? What has been your favorite thing to do with your money, Marcia?
Honestly, if I sometimes will think about, like, what if I won the lottery? What if I just had this, like, ridiculous amount of money, like you'd see, like, on shows like Shark Tank or something? I literally would wanna give it away. I would wanna give it to all the entrepreneurs out there that are doing all of these amazing things, and, in fact, one of the cool things that my husband and I do every once in a while when it comes to, like, gift giving, like, we got way past the point of getting each other gifts, and we more spoil the kids or whatever. But this idea that we each took a couple $100 bills and over the period of like, let's say 3 weeks. So let's say it was leading up to Christmas. So it would be like in the December timeframe. And each of us had to give one of the $100 bills to someone that we thought the other one would really appreciate that we had picked that particular type of person in order to help them with whatever. And in a lot of cases, it was like cool things. Like you could just be walking through Target and you can see a mom who is there with her kid and they want to buy Christmas presents and you just slip in. To me, that is the kind of like generosity that makes me like that type of paying it forward is the type of thing that I really care about. Sometimes it could be like you're going to buy somebody's coffee in line or something like that. But at the end of the day, if we're all at Starbucks, we can probably all afford the coffee. But where can you go? I love the nonprofit pay away the layaway. Pay. I think that's what they call it, pay away the layaway. And because it's all about how can you help families that they're not destitute, they're not necessarily there's a difference between needing government assistance and then not having enough money in order to do what you want to for your children. So that level is like where I feel like if I can help in that way, then to me that would make me feel like I was making a difference.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really, I feel like you've not only inspired me, but so many other women to think about just the ways in which you can make an impact into the fabric of our society in a very real way. You know,
Yeah.
I think it was some months ago, I wanted to GoFundMe and I just went to look for people I didn't know, but people who were fundraising for surgeries or things. And I put a little bit of money aside and I was like, I'm just going to anonymously help a few people that I know
Yeah.
need it. And man, it felt so good. It was like, it was so small in the macro of the world, but yet it did so much for me,
Mhm.
to be able to
Yeah.
do that. That's really special. Marcia, what can we do for you? What is it that you are calling in? What do you need? What do you want? What can the audience do to uplift and support your mission? Anything big, anything small? What comes to mind?
I need more Amazon reviews for my book. Somebody please put up more Amazon reviews. I'm like at 78 reviews right now and I'm trying to get to 100. It's like, please. The algorithms, apparently, I've been told by people, the algorithms change once you hit 100 reviews. So then I guess, the Amazon algorithm people or bots think that you actually have half a clue as an author. So, yeah. So, anybody who's willing to put an Amazon review up, I would appreciate it. So, there's that. And then, of course, buy the book. That'd be great. But on my website, you can get the first chapter for free. I have lots of resources there. And then, of course, listen to the podcast, review the podcast too. Reviews don't cost anything, but man, is it hard to get people to do. They're
I
kind of like, "Oh, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it." And then they forget. And I get it. Now that I'm an author, I'll be like, I review everybody's book and I'm like, 5 stars, 5 stars. But yeah, no, that's the way to spread the message though, because at the end of the day, sure, would I like to sell more books, but that's not the point. The point is, how do we get more women to feel empowered to use their money for good? But also, how do we get it so that it is easier for those female founders to be and fund managers to be able to raise the money that they need in order to build the things that we want to see in the world?
Mm, that's beautiful, Marcia. So, you guys, you heard it in the show notes. Click on every single one of Marcia's links and go review, purchase, but 5 stars all the ways. And I think you have to make it like more than a few words. So, guys, come on. It's time
Yeah,
to.
you can just say Marcia's funny or whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to say anything like important, you know.
So
Marcia's
amazing.
crazy. You can say that too. It doesn't matter.
Marcia, I am grateful for your leadership, your friendship, your kindness, and the work that you contribute to the world. I know you inspire me, and I know that you have been an inspiration to many people today who are listening to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe, and if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.